Welcome to Al Jazeera's weekly Q&A live from Doha. My name is Birce Bora and I'm an online producer for Al Jazeera English. Today I'm joined with Al Jazeera correspondent Jamal El-Shayal, and we will be talking about the constitutional reform in Turkey. Today, the Turkish parliament is getting ready to debate the articles of the controversial new draft constitution. With this proposal, the MPs are planning to change the Turkish parliamentary system into a presidential one. The supporters of the new draft are saying that with this change, Turkey will be able to prosper under a more stable system. But the critics are saying this is just a power ploy by President Recep Tayyep Erdogan. They say he will use this change to become the new dictator of the country. So Jamal, what's in this draft and why is it so controversial?
Well, essentially, the plan here with this draft change in the constitution is, to put it very simply, to change the governing body from, or the governing system in Turkey from a parliamentary system to a presidential system. Now, realistically, actually, Turkey right now is actually in between two. It's not a total parliamentary system and it's not a presidential system. And what do I mean by that? Before, roughly about or around 5 years ago, it was purely a parliamentary system in that it was parliament that was elected by the people, and then it was the parliament that chose the president from within. However, now, when the constitution was changed roughly about 5 years ago in a referendum, which was quite widely supported by the Turkish public, the constitution was changed to allow for the president to be directly elected and chosen by the Turkish people. And what that means is you now have some sort of a power conflict, so to speak, between the prime minister, who is the obviously head of the majority party in parliament, and the president, because each have their own mandate. And we actually saw that power conflict play out between, even though they're from the same party, Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Prime Minister Davutoglu. Because the president felt that he had his own mandates, 52% of the population elected him directly, and the prime minister obviously felt that or former prime minister Davutoglu felt that he had his own mandate, in that a large percentage of the population had voted, roughly about 40% or so, voted for the AK party. So what the country, or what the AK party now is saying, and actually now it's allied with the MHP, that's the nationalist party, they're saying they need to change this and get rid of the confusion between where the real power lies and centralize it in a presidential system. So you would still have a parliament that would legislate, so the laws would still come through the parliament, but in terms of the executive body, in terms of who has the ability to implement things directly, then that would, more of that power would be transferred to the president, who would be directly elected by the people.
But one of the main criticisms directed at this draft has been that the proposal is not a presidential system in the American or the French sense, because it's, in a way, people say it is destroying the system of checks and balances. Can you explain this to us?
Well,
what are the criticisms and what do you think about this?
The thing is, you need to look at Turkey through, I would say, 3 different angles, right? You need to look at Turkey through the angles of personalities who play a significant role. So even you're talking about, for example, the personality of the founding father of modern Turkey, Ataturk, to this day plays a significant role. And obviously the personality of Recep Tayyip Erdogan plays a significant role. You need to look at the perspective of Turkey through events. Specific events have shaped Turkey. So from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire to the 3 different military coups to the latest failed military coup attempt, all of these have had an impact, to the Gezi Park protests. All of these have an impact in terms of how Turkish society thinks and acts. And the third, obviously, you need to look at it from the perspective of how the Turkish society is built, the identity in terms of nationalism and so forth. Some people would say, because this is coming from President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's party, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a very strong and imposing figure, that this is why they would view that he is trying to make this as a power grab, right? Other people would say that, and particularly those who are in favor of it, that actually the Turkish people are the checks and balance, in the sense that when there was an attempt to destroy or overcome democracy through the military coup. It was the people who came out onto the streets and saved it, and therefore there should be no worry about how democracy
But if you
is.
just look at it as a political system, the draft supposes that if it's accepted, the judiciary is also going to be under the control of the executive branch.
Yes.
Isn't this a big problem in a country like Turkey? Not only for Erdogan's era, but we need to think ahead
Of course,
also
I
to
mean,
decades
there's-
later.
it's important, but it's important to note there's definitely many criticisms that are being leveled against this, and there are definitely many concerns. But what I will always say is that you need to look at the democratization as a process. And even in the US, for example, I mean, under the US, for example, the US, there's judiciary that is appointed by the president. The president nominates people to the Supreme Court. This isn't
But
something
they have
that's
an incredibly strong checks and
that's-
balances system, so the
there,
president
I mean,
cannot-
the argument would say that the Turkish parliament under this would be able to trigger a no confidence in the presidency, and that there are specific
if
checks
you
and
look at
balances.
it-
But what I would
Yeah.
what I would say is this: I'm not saying that there isn't criticisms. Of course, there are criticisms. Nothing is perfect, but you have to look at Turkey as a process. So you're talking about a country that was less than 100 years ago the Ottoman Empire, has now become a different entity in terms of a nationalist republic, and through its time as a national republic has had 3 different military coups, has had just a 4th attempt at a military coup, is on the crossroads between Europe and Asia, between the Middle East and the West. All of these things, in terms of forging an identity, in terms of understanding the right type of democracy, because there isn't just one type fits all, that is a process. So there could be a period where a parliamentary system is apt. There could be a period where there's a presidential system that is more significant. But the most important thing, and I think this is where I always find it very admirable when I go to cover Turkey, is in terms of voter turnout and engagement of the Turkish public, it's probably second to none. You're talking about even local elections which usually in the UK, for example, are like 50% turnout. So you're talking about 85%.
So doesn't that mean
90%
parliamentary
turnout.
system is actually working? People are participating. We have checks and balances. Why Turkey has the need to move on to the
I
presidential
mean,
system?
as far as that's not for me to answer. That's for the politicians. As far as the AK Party is concerned and the MHP, because it's not just an AK Party proposal, it is being supported by the Nationalist Party. They believe that as it stands now, Turkey faces a lot of threats, both internally and externally. That the judiciary has been infiltrated by what they describe as the parallel state. That's the Gülenist movement. The police has been infiltrated. The army has been infiltrated. They believe that the economy, after it had a great surge over 10, 15 years where the GDP has been tripled and roads have been built and all these mega projects have done, is also now faltering. And in order to ensure that the success that's been made economically is maintained, and in order to ensure that the state doesn't crumble under what they describe as a parallel state, you need a strong centralized government.
But
Now,
what
there
I
are-
don't understand is, for example, after what Turkey has been through after the coup attempt, is it logical to give a group of people, one person actually, that much power? Isn't this creates more of a risk to something like this happening again? Because there's no other way to react against the executive branch.
Coming from a Middle Eastern background and as an Arab, I have my own concerns with regards to the personas having these significant things. But Turkey has never had an issue with that. Like I say, Ataturk's pictures adorn every single hole in. I mean, the guy's been dead for almost 100
Yes,
years.
and isn't that
So
an issue that they're trying to move on from?
There- I think-
what AKP was trying to do was to.
What I'm saying
And
is,
this cult.
I think Turkish. No, I think it may just be an issue of. I think Turkish culture has an affinity to finding specific figureheads. Even the Gülenist movement, or even in terms of leftist, even the Kurdish with Öcalan, there's always this idea of finding a figure
Yeah.
and rallying behind it, right?
I completely
So I
agree.
think that
Then
comes
this-
instinctive.
Isn't
It's not
this
a
risk to giving so much power to one person,
It could
knowing
be.
that the public
It-
is going to
it could-
create their own hero
It,
under him.
it could very well be. That is, I think that's a point that could be discussed. What they would say in response, though, the AK Party, is that the parliament still exists. The parliament is the checks and balances, the people, and so forth. That's a discussion from an outside perspective. in my view, obviously the more checks and balances you have, the safer democracy becomes. So for example, when you have an independent judiciary on one hand, you have an independent legislative body, you have an independent executive body, even if you have like a fourth in terms of, obviously we call it the fourth authority, which is a free independent media and so forth, though those checks and balances usually will ensure that, so if one becomes hijacked by a specific group or a specific ideology, you have the other three to work out. But like I say, realistically speaking, you look at, for example, look at what's going on in the United States now. You look at what's going on across Europe in terms of how things are becoming a lot more draconian. There have been laws that have just passed in the UK, which, I mean, there's talk about abolishing the Human Rights Act in the United Kingdom.
Yes,
there is a trend in the world, unfortunately, and I say this unfortunately, where people are looking for black and white answers, right? Because when there is uncertainty, that's what's happened. Now, those supporting this change will say that this is a white answer, in the sense that it comes, yes, it's very clear, it's distinctive, but it's good. Obviously, those opposing it would view it as a black answer, in that it is dragging Turkey towards a lack of democracy. As it stands now, however, I would say as a journalist, looking at Turkey over the past 15 years, there's the criticism that's been leveled towards the democratization process in Turkey, to be honest, is over-exaggerated. Yes, there have been shortcomings. Yes, there have been issues. But when you look at, for example, democracy in Turkey vis-a-vis democracy in other European countries, or even in the Middle East that are allies to the West, that you don't hear a single whisper with regards to what's happening, no, I think there is a double standard towards it, to be honest.
Okay, let's move on to another issue. Another criticism that this draft has faced is the timing of it. Yesterday, CHP MP Deniz Baykal and their former leader said, why now? Why is this being implemented now that we're facing so many terror threats? We're still dealing with the repercussions of the coup. Being in Turkey and covering Turkey so often, do you have an idea why the government feels the urgency to push the reform at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think he's either misleading or misunderstanding. This proposal has been on the table for a good 4 or 5 years. I mean, the AK Party made it one of their election promises in the last, not the rerun of the elections, but the first round of the parliamentary elections. It was one of their promises. So they've always wanted to do this. Why now? I mean, now they're pinning it down.
Especially given that Turkey is now under a
emergency law. And so the question isn't why now. The question is, what he should be asking is, shouldn't they be putting a pause on this? Because it's not like they've come about it now. Like I said, this has been in the works for several years. As far as the AK Party, and this is what, when I speak to many of the officials there, have been saying, they actually think now more than ever they need it because of the threat, right? And like I say, this is the thing, at times of uncertainty, people look generally, human instinct is to look for some sort of stability, and they view that having a strong centralized power brings that stability. There is merit in that idea. There is also a lot of alarm bells that ring with that idea, because you can have that strong centralized thing, and then that strong centralized becomes something worse.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that. The draft says that under the new constitution, the president is going to have the right to declare a state of emergency on his own. And under a state of emergency, he will have a right to lead the country with executive orders. Isn't there a huge risk of this turning into a constant state of emergency?
No, I don't think so, because I mean, firstly, that's nothing strange. Most presidents around the world have that right, from France to the US. It's not something that's that would be unique to Turkey. And we've seen Turkey under the state of emergency over the past few months. Yes, there have been mass arrests in terms of things, but in terms of actual freedom of expression, it hasn't been as bad as, like I say, Egypt, for example, or other countries.
Okay, but let's not start comparing Turkey with other countries.
No, I think it's important to compare. No. It's very important to compare, because they're in.
That have been closed down.
Of course, yes, but it's very important to make the comparison. Why? Because in order for you to understand the reaction of a government, you need to see the region in which it's in, and you need to understand the threats about it. So if I'm walking down the street and I see somebody screaming and shouting and hitting somebody for no reason, I will think that there's something wrong with that person. But if somebody explains to me the context of it, that that person was, there was an attempt at their life and so forth, then maybe I can understand it. I may not justify and totally agree with their reactions, but it's important to put it into context. So when you look at, for example, what's been taking place in terms of, several hundred people being killed in terms of PKK-related attacks or ISIS-related attacks or the military coup attempt and so
Can't
forth.
these problems be faced under parliamentary systems? That's what
That's one. Yeah, of course. That's an opinion. Yeah. There are a lot of people who believe that. Yes, of course. That is one point of view. The other point of view says it doesn't. The question then becomes, what do the majority of the people think? Now, this is what I would say is, unfortunately, when it comes to Turkey, where the kind of there is an unfair reporting of the issue is this, right? Every single step of the way that the AK Party has come across in terms of changing the constitution or changing laws, each one of those has been supported by an overwhelming popular mandate.
But the latest polls are showing that more than 70% of the public doesn't know what's in this.
Forget about polls. I'm not talking about media polls. I'm talking about electoral polls. So I'm talking about free and fair elections, right? Now, this is my issue. My issue is when people report on Turkey, they report based on what they personally believe, or the institution that they work for believes, or the country that they're trying to sell their product to, be it a newspaper or a television, would like to hear. The fact of the matter is, every single step of the way, whether it's been through elections or whether it's been through referendums, these changes have come about not by a 51 to 49 percentage. You're talking about 65 and above.
Of course, I know all this. I'm Turkish. I lived under this government, and I've been through this.
So therefore, it's important to note that when we're looking at any change, you're changing now. If we're going to change, if Turkey is going to change this constitution, the first thing, it has to pass through the parliament. When it passes through parliament, it's not a 50% majority. You're talking about a 65, two-thirds majority.
You know all this, but my point.
So this is democracy, though.
Of course, it's democracy, but it's similar to what the Brexit debate was all about. When you ask the public, they don't know about the constitution. They're voting for their leader.
Okay, so what do? You don't listen to the public?
Maybe do you inform them more?
I mean, possibly. Of course,
that has been in the discussions in the parliament. Then that's a media's.
No. I think that's the media's perspective. That's part of the media's fault in terms of not informing. Because if you're talking about Brexit had it was the media who's setting the agenda, and it said it in a very one-dimensional way. And I think with Turkey, unfortunately, there is a very big problem that the Turkish public faces, in that its media is very polarized. In large parts of it is very unprofessional. And I'm sorry to say this, but it is sensationalist and either extremely in favor of the government or extremely against the government. There's no middle ground, right? But in the end of the day, democracy means that there is one person, one vote, not one educated person, one voted, or one aware person, one vote.
Okay, let's move on to some of our audience questions. This question is from YouTube. They're asking about what provision is in the constitution to protect Kurdish rights, the new drafts they're asking.
To be honest, I'm not actually sure if there's something specific new, but again, the Kurdish question is interesting, and this is something very significant, which is this. When the AK Party first came in, they actually did made a lot of headway in terms of actually appeasing Kurdish communities. So areas around Diyarbakir and the southeast were actually developed a lot. New airports were built, and universities. There was, even for the first time, Kurdish media outlets were allowed. The fact that the Kurds could have their own party is something significant.
But this was in the past, of course.
So this is something that was first. However, and this is where I personally find a very dangerous turn taking place in Turkey. In order to win over the MHP, who are the nationalists, and in order to regain their single-party majority in the parliamentary elections, I believe the AK Party reduced the importance that it had given to the peace process, or the reconciliation, or whatever they want to call it, the solution process. I can't remember what it was called, what they gave it a name in Turkey. And that no longer became a priority. Obviously, it didn't help the fact that the PKK and affiliated groups went and killed two soldiers or two police officers as they slept, or started bombing things. But I think at the same time, there was no attempt to try and cool the flames. And I think that was one of the conditions that the MHP gave the AK Party, if the AK Party wanted the MHP's support in terms of changing the constitution, would be in order for
So can we
for
say
the
this
issue.
move is basically the complete end to a possible peace process in the future? Because Selahattin Demirtas yesterday, the jailed HDP, pro-Kurdish HDP leader, yesterday said going forward with a draft like this, while 11 of our MPs are in jail, is putting the whole procedure under question, because they are the second biggest opposition party in the parliament. So can we say, is with this constitution, AKP is saying to MHP?
No, not necessarily,
stop.
because like I say, the constitution is not about the Kurds. The constitution is about the political system. I think the political alignment that's been made in order to pass it, that has an implication. But the constitution itself, does not single out the Kurds in anything. So I don't think that's an issue. It's just the political atmosphere around it. Yes, it's not conducive to the issue. But like I say, you have to, I mean, everything has to be seen from every which way. So we're looking at it from a perspective here. Like I say, the AK Party has been opportunistic politically in terms of trying to win over the nationalists and the MHPs, in terms of not putting much of an effort with regards to the peace process. You look at it from the other way, the Kurdish armed groups have triggered the failure of this peace process by killing police officers. You look at it from another way, you see what's going on in Syria and the YPG and the infiltrations that are taking place and how that's further confounding it.
We can talk about this for an hour.
You know?
I'm moving on to another audience question. They're asking, is it really democratic when whole media hold ties with AKP and 80% of the voters only see what AKP want them to see?
Is it really democratic when? Sorry?
Is it really democratic when whole media hold ties with AKP and 80% of the voters only see what AKP want them to see? They're talking about
that the media is biased
media,
in favor. I don't think that's the case. I think there are a lot of anti-government media outlets, and aside from that, in terms of digital platforms, social media, and so forth, there's no. I mean, in this day and age, even if you close off, and you should never close off media outlets, but even if you do, there's no silencing the other voice. So I think there's those who want to hear a different voice can always find a different voice. There are still protests that take place. The CHP still operates freely and has been very vocal with regards to its opposition towards the
But don't you think there's a domination of the pro-government arguments in the mainstream media right now?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen any study that's shown in terms of aggregating things, of how many minutes have been given here and how many channels there are, how many things. So I can't say. But like I say, I don't think you're not talking about North Korea here. You're talking about a country that does have at least free access to different points of views. You know, so I think that's. If they want to, I think, to be honest, what I would say actually is it's more critical in terms of why you may not have the diversity in views, is actually the failure of the CHP to learn from any of the mistakes it's done over the past 10 years, the 10, 15 years. The CHP has failed miserably at every single parliamentary or electoral role, and it still hasn't realized how to engage with the people, still uses the same kind of rhetoric, and I think that's probably a problem.
Blame what the government is doing to the opposition's.
No, it's not. It's not blaming anybody. What I'm saying is, if you want to look at the landscape and wonder why. So, if, for example, Facebook is extremely popular and MySpace went out of business, right? You're not just going to say, "Oh, Facebook has become a monopoly." You have to figure out why the other one didn't learn from how things have been changing. So this is my point. The point is there hasn't been any attempt to re-engage with the Turkish public. And when you look at how the elections are done from, like I say, from small perspectives in terms of engaging with voter youth and so forth.
This question was about media, and we have to talk about auto-censorship and the situation all the big media companies are in Turkey, which is another dimension, I'm sure, as you know.
I mean, you're talking about a lot of these media companies are linked with billionaire businessmen. Right?
That's what I'm
They have their own, but they have
their own agendas, and they auto-censor to not lose.
That's the businessman's issue, right?
So we can't blame the government for any kind of media control.
No, you can. Of course, you can. Of course, there have been outlets that have been closed off. There have been people that have been that have been arrested because of their links or their alleged links to. Of course, that's taken place. But I don't think that's crucial to the constitutional draft change. I think the constitutional draft change, you're talking about, can we blame the public for knowing what's going on or not knowing what's going on? The lights aren't switched off in Turkey. If people want to know what the constitution right now, are you able to find out what this constitutional change is about?
I can.
A quick
but
Google
somebody's
search.
only watching.
One second, no,
TV
figure it out.
channels are not be able
They
to.
don't have. Nobody's got internet now. No, everybody.
Of course they do,
can't do a
but
Google search to figure out what it's about.
You can't.
I'm pretty sure they can.
You can't equate
Let's not
a regular member of
over-exaggerate
the
it.
public to the journalist.
A regular
They're just
member of the
watching-
public just Googles it. That's what they need to do.
I'm not saying
I'm
it.
pretty sure they
Let's
can
move on
find
to
it
another
out.
question. This is from YouTube again. What has been the USA's role in the continuing formation of democracy in Turkey? Is there an undermining influence in the West?
What has been the
Role of
Role of
the
the
USA,
US.
yeah.
It depends who you believe, to be honest. The government claims that the US was behind, or at least government figures rather, claim that the US was behind the failed coup attempt. The US has strongly denied it. I personally, from how I've seen things, I doubt the US was involved. I think the US may have known that something was going to take place because the US intelligence apparatuses, particularly their presence in Incirlik Air Base and so forth, it would mean that they were very dumb or deaf if they didn't know something was wrong. So knowing and not maybe giving a heads up, does that include? I'm not sure.
How do you think the US is looking at this constitutional discussions? Where do they stand in all this?
Personally, I think the US is clueless because I don't think the State Department has been very intelligent in terms of how it's operated over the past 5 years since, or 6 years since 2011. It hasn't known who to support, who not to support. It wasn't sure whether it wants to be isolationist and not get involved or get involved. It was kind of caught in between two things. I think the US views generally Turkey as a very significant ally. It is the second largest member of NATO. When it comes to Syria, it's very significant. When it comes to Iraq, when it comes to Iran, obviously all of these things. However, I don't think there is a clear strategy in terms of how to work with Turkey. And I don't think, to be honest, Turkey realizes what it wants to do. The shifting suddenly to the kind of like Russia side of things, I think, was a knee-jerk reaction. I think the isolation or the weakness that the Turkish government felt it was under and the pressure because of the failed coup attempt forced it to go that way. I don't think that's the cleverest thing. You should never act in terms of a reactionary thing, but that's their kind of
Okay,
you know.
now that we're in our last 5 minutes, I'm going to move on to another subject. One of our viewers is asking, how is this new constitution is going to help the country to fight the terrorism threat?
Well, the government says this will enable for the centralized power to act in a swift way in order to ensure that there is oversight in an attempt to kind of like make sure the security apparatuses reports directly to the presidency, that you don't have to go through all these different kind of bureaucratic hoops in order to ensure something happens. I don't think there's been any study, in my view, that shows that the presidential system is better than a parliamentary system in terms of security threats. I think it's all perceived perceptions in terms of politics, but I don't think there's been any scientific evidence to show it. However, having said that, I do think there is something to say when it comes to swift reactions. So, for example, let's say, we're not going to talk about this. Let's say, for example, there is a threat that comes from Syria or from a foreign country. For you to have to go through Parliament and Parliament to debate it and discuss it before you can approve military action could take realistically at least 48 hours, right? Because by the time Parliament assembles and there's a discussion for a few hours and so forth. Whereas in a presidential system, it takes 2 minutes. The president gets briefed and so forth. So there, in terms of the swiftness of reaction, definitely at least.
But we can also say it gives the president the opportunity to make mistakes
Of
without
course,
asking anyone.
of course.
So
Like I said, look, people have to stop looking at democracy as something that is been perfected by anybody. It hasn't. And it is a work in progress. The question is always how much freedom is being curtailed and how much freedom is being given. And that's the barometer in terms of looking at things. Once you feel that the people are worried to say what they believe. People are worried that in the middle of the night the police can come and round them up and take them. That people are being targeted because of their religious or belief or their ethnicity, or that's where you've got an issue. But when you're talking about a parliamentary system or a presidential system, or when you're talking about whether somebody appoints a judiciary or not, so long as there are other kind of state institutions that kind of check this out, it's a question about looking at different formulas.
But wouldn't, I'm going back to the judiciary because I think it's one of the most important parts of this draft. If you make one party or one person assign the judiciary and control them in a way, that's the draft, what the draft is promising us. Isn't that create a risk that you're talking about?
Well, to be honest, you've already had one person apparently appointing your judiciary in Turkey for a very long time, and the fact that if the cases are to be believed of how many Gülenist members of the judiciary have been arrested, then it was you already had an exile
of course, we had
already
that
doing
example
that.
of when
So-
we're cleaning that,
so I
supposedly,
think-
as the government is saying. It's incredibly worrying to see it's giving to
I
another
think-
person.
Well, this is the thing. Well, that person would have been elected by the people. That's where they would say. I think what's important here is what you have in terms of appeals process. That's the most important thing. So, for example, when you look at the United Kingdom, one of the best things of its presence when it was in Europe before obviously Brexit was you could go through several courts of appeals within the UK, and then you had the European Court of Human Rights, and you could appeal through that. The appeals process is the most important thing, because that always gives you a chance to look for another institution or another body in terms of jury and so forth, in case one is either corrupt or under pressure and so
But
forth.
in practice, as we know in Turkey, you can be in jail for years until you get the chance to appeal because these cases. So
I don't think there's been many of those cases that have taken place in terms of, you're talking about this highly politicized ones, or in terms of particularly because Turkey's been essentially at war with, and they're usually linked with mainly actually with the Kurdish issue. That's where you have most of the issues.
well, it's still.
I think the real concern of the Turkish public should be looking at trying to find a solution to that issue, because so long as the Kurdish question
Isn't the best
remains
way to solve
unanswered,
that issue creating an independent judiciary who are not going to be affected by the.
they would say it's not. It is independent. Just because it's appointed. The same way, like I say, the U.S. would claim its judiciary is independent, even though that the Supreme Court judges are appointed by the president and blocked also by Congress, depending on who they want. It's very politicized there.
Okay, so I think we need to wrap up now. So can we, to end this, can you explain to us what's the process is going to be like after this point? They started debating. What's next?
So after the debate, obviously, it will be presented to the parliament. Members of parliament have to vote. At least 2/3 of them have to vote in favor of this. It seems on the outskirts that 2/3 are in favor, because you have the AK party, that's the governing party, aligned with the MHP, which is the nationalist party. Their MPs added up would give you that 2/3 majority. Once that 2/3 majority is reached, it still then has to go to a public referendum where you would need a majority for that to be voted. So it is still there is still at least 2 more steps to be taken. But obviously the thing is with Turkey, again, when I was telling you about looking at it from different angles, things change very quickly. And Turkey is at a very volatile situation now with what's going on in Syria, with what's going on in Iraq, with what's going on with ISIL, the EU itself. All of these things will play a role, be it in terms of how the final draft is done and how things are passed, or even just the timing of these elections and so forth. That's going to be very significant as well.
Thank you so much, Jamal. This is all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us here at Al Jazeera's weekly Q&A. Next week we will be back with another story that we covered through the week. See you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.